The Montana frost bit deep that morning, turning the sprawling pastures of Daniel Thompson's ranch into sheets of silver crystal. At 58, Daniel had built an empire worth $43 million from nothing but dirt, determination, and an unshakable understanding of livestock. His 12,000-acre operation supplied premium beef to restaurants from Seattle to New York, but success had come at a cost. He drove his Ford F-450 across the North Pasture, steam rising from his coffee mug in the sub-zero air. The routine morning inspection had become his ritual of solitude, a way to escape the endless phone calls from investors, the pressure of maintaining profit margins that could buy small towns. That's when he saw it. A massive form limping along his fence line, moving with the painful determination of something that refused to surrender. Daniel slowed the vehicle, squinting through the morning haze. The animal was enormous, easily 2,200 pounds of raw muscle and bone. A bull, but not one of his. As he drew closer, the full picture emerged. The bull's left hind leg dragged uselessly, a compound fracture visible even from 50 yards. Dried blood matted its black hide, and ribs showed through a coat dulled by neglect. Most telling of all, a bright orange ear tag marked "Reject" in bold letters. Daniel had seen enough livestock auctions to know what that tag meant. This bull had been marked for slaughter, deemed unfit for breeding, too damaged to be profitable. Someone had loaded it onto a trailer bound for the processing plant, but somehow it had escaped. Now it wandered, injured and alone, across the frozen Montana landscape. The bull lifted its massive head as Daniel approached, dark eyes reflecting a mixture of pain and defiance. Despite the injury, despite the clear exhaustion, the animal held its ground. There was something in its posture, a refusal to submit that struck Daniel as almost human. He cut the engine and stepped out slowly, hands visible. The bull's nostrils flared, breath steaming in the frigid air. Daniel had handled thousands of cattle over 4 decades, but this moment felt different. This wasn't about profit margins or breeding schedules. This was about choice. The bull took a labored step forward, then another, until it stood less than 10 feet away. Daniel could see the full extent of the damage now. Infection setting in around the fracture, dehydration evident in its sunken flanks. By every business calculation he'd ever made, this animal represented nothing but expense and liability. But as those dark eyes met his, Daniel found himself thinking not of spreadsheets and vet bills, but of his own journey. 40 years ago, he'd been the one people had written off. A broke ranch hand with big dreams and no capital, dismissed by every bank in 3 counties. Someone had taken a chance on him then, old Henry Carlson, who'd lent him the money for his first 100 head. "Easy, big guy," Daniel said quietly, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent his life understanding animals. "Nobody's going to hurt you here." The bull's ears flicked forward, and in that gesture, Daniel made a decision that would cost him more than money. It would cost him the carefully constructed walls he'd built around his heart. Daniel reached into his truck for the emergency medical kit he always carried during inspections. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, pulling out antiseptic and gauze. The bull watched every movement, muscles tense but not retreating. "This is going to sting," Daniel murmured, approaching with the antiseptic. The bull's eyes never left his face, and when the solution hit the infected wound, the massive animal shuddered but stood firm. As Daniel worked, cleaning what he could of the injury, his phone buzzed repeatedly. His foreman, his accountant, his buyers in Chicago, all the moving parts of his empire demanding attention. But for the first time in years, Daniel ignored them all. The bull's breathing gradually steadied as Daniel worked. When he finished, the animal lowered its head slightly, not in submission, but in what looked remarkably like gratitude. Daniel stepped back, studying the massive creature. Every practical instinct screamed that this was foolish. A dying bull with a reject tag had no place on a premium cattle operation. But something deeper overruled logic. He pulled out his phone and dialed Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the best large animal vet in 3 counties. "Sarah, it's Daniel Thompson. I need you out here immediately, and bring everything you've got for orthopedic surgery." "Daniel, what's wrong? Did one of your prize bulls get injured?" Daniel looked at the rejected bull standing before him, still defiant despite everything it had endured. Something like that. Just hurry. As he ended the call, the bull took another step closer. Daniel held out his hand, palm open, the way he'd learned to approach skittish cattle decades ago. For a long moment, neither moved. Then, with infinite care, the bull extended its massive head and gently touched Daniel's palm with its muzzle. The contact lasted only seconds, but Daniel felt something shift inside him, a crack in the armor he'd built around his heart since his wife Margaret's death 5 years ago. The sun climbed higher, burning off the frost and revealing the full scope of the ranch stretching beyond the horizon. But Daniel's world had suddenly narrowed to this moment, this choice, this connection with a creature the world had deemed worthless. He'd spent 40 years building an empire. Today, he began something different entirely. Thompson Ranch Isolation Barn. 3 days later, Dr. Sarah Mitchell had seen her share of impossible cases in 20 years of large animal veterinary work, but the bull lying in Daniel Thompson's isolation barn defied every principle of practical ranching. The compound fracture alone should have been a death sentence, the kind of injury that meant one thing in the cattle business: immediate euthanasia. "You're looking at $12,000 minimum," she said, kneeling beside the massive animal Daniel had named Titan. "Surgery, titanium pins, months of recovery with no guarantee he'll ever walk normally again." "Daniel, this doesn't make business sense." Daniel stood at the edge of the stall, watching Titan's labored breathing. The bull's dark eyes tracked every movement, alert despite the pain medication Sarah had administered. "Business sense says a lot of things. Doesn't mean they're all worth following." Sarah looked up from her examination, recognizing something different in Daniel's voice. She'd worked with him for 15 years, watched him build his operation from 2,000 acres to 12,000. He'd always been ruthlessly practical, every decision calculated for maximum return on investment. "Your foreman called me yesterday," she said quietly, running her hands along Titan's injured leg. "Jake's worried about you. Says you've been sleeping in the barn, haven't taken a business call in 3 days. Your buyers in Chicago are getting nervous." Daniel picked up a brush and began working it gently through Titan's coat, removing the last traces of dried blood and dirt. The bull remained still under his touch, not the frozen stillness of fear, but the quiet acceptance of an animal learning to trust again. "Maybe those buyers need to learn patience," Daniel said. "World won't end if a few steaks get delivered a day late." Sarah studied his face, noting the stubble he hadn't bothered to shave, the clothes he'd slept in. This wasn't like the Daniel Thompson she knew, the man who'd built a $43 million empire through discipline and relentless focus. "What's really going on here, Daniel? You've got 300 head of prime Angus, contracts with the best restaurants in the country, and you're ready to spend 12 grand on a bull somebody marked for slaughter." Daniel continued brushing Titan's coat, his movements steady and methodical. "You ever wonder what it's like to be written off? To have someone look at you and decide you're not worth the effort? This is about more than the bull." "Maybe it is." Daniel set down the brush and met Sarah's eyes. "Maybe I'm tired of looking at everything like it's just numbers on a spreadsheet. This bull survived being loaded onto a slaughter truck. He walked God knows how many miles on a shattered leg to get here. That's not nothing." Sarah watched the interaction between man and animal, noting how Titan's ears stayed forward when Daniel spoke, how the massive creature seemed calmer in his presence. In 20 years of veterinary work, she'd learned to recognize the subtle signs of trust developing between species. "All right," she said, standing and dusting straw from her jeans. "But we do this properly. Full surgical suite, proper anesthesia, the works. If we're going to try to save him, we don't half-ass it." The surgery took 6 hours. Daniel waited in the barn office, unable to concentrate on the stack of contracts and financial reports his assistant had brought from the main house. Through the window, he could see his prize-winning Angus herd grazing in the distance, animals worth more per head than most people made in a year. When Sarah finally emerged, exhaustion lined her face, but her eyes held cautious optimism. "The pins are in place. Infection was worse than I initially thought, but we got it cleaned out. He's got good bone density, strong constitution. Better foundation than a lot of animals half his age. Will he walk again? Ask me in 6 weeks. Right now, the important thing is keeping him still, keeping the wound clean, and watching for complications." Sarah pulled off her surgical gloves. Bulls are resilient animals. They don't give up easy when they've got reason to fight. That evening, Daniel set up a cot in the barn office. His housekeeper, Rosa, brought dinner and raised an eyebrow at the sight of the millionaire rancher preparing to sleep next to a recovering bull. "Mr. Daniel," she said in her lightly accented English, "you have a perfectly good house with central heating. The veterinarian, she said the bull needs rest, not company." "He's been alone long enough," Daniel replied, testing the stability of the cot. "Besides, someone needs to monitor him overnight. Watch for complications." Rosa studied Titan, who lay quietly on thick bedding, his breathing steady but his eyes alert. "What you call him?" "Titan." She nodded approvingly. "Strong name. Sounds like winner, not reject." She set down a thermos of coffee and an extra blanket. "You need anything, you call. Rosa knows about taking care of stubborn creatures." As night settled over the Montana landscape, Daniel found himself genuinely tired for the first time in months. Not the bone-deep exhaustion of endless business calls and financial pressure, but the honest fatigue of physical work and emotional investment. Around midnight, he woke to the sound of movement. Titan had shifted position, carefully avoiding weight on his injured leg, and was looking toward the office window where Daniel's cot sat. "Can't sleep either," Daniel said quietly, rising to check on his patient. He approached slowly, noting how Titan's ears remained forward rather than pinning back in alarm. The bull's breathing was steady, his eyes clear despite the lingering effects of anesthesia. "Leg bothering you or just too much excitement for one day?" Daniel asked, running a practiced eye over the surgical site. No signs of excessive swelling, no heat that would indicate infection returning. Titan shifted again, a small movement that somehow conveyed awareness without distress. Daniel found himself talking, not the clipped, efficient communication of business calls, but the rambling, one-sided conversation of someone who'd forgotten what it was like to have a captive audience. "You know what's funny? I've got employees, contractors, buyers calling me every day, hundreds of people whose livelihoods depend on decisions I make, but I can't remember the last time any of them actually listened." He adjusted Titan's water bucket, ensuring it was within easy reach. "Maybe that's the difference between being needed and being heard." The bull's ear flicked toward him, a small acknowledgement that carried surprising weight. Daniel returned to his cot, but sleep came easier now. Outside, the Montana wind carried the familiar sounds of his ranch settling for the night, but inside the barn something new was taking root. Not dramatic or sentimental, but real and steady as the rhythm of Titan's breathing. Thompson Ranch, 2 weeks after surgery. The Montana morning carried the crisp promise of early winter when Daniel heard the unfamiliar sound of a school bus grinding to a halt at the end of his long driveway. He looked up from checking Titan's surgical site, noting with satisfaction that the swelling had decreased significantly and the bull was bearing slight weight on the injured leg. Through the barn window, he watched a small figure jump down from the bus. A girl, maybe 11 or 12, with a bright red backpack nearly as large as she was. She stood at the gate for a moment, clearly uncertain, then began the quarter-mile walk toward the main buildings. "Rosa?" Daniel called toward the house. "We expecting someone?" His housekeeper appeared on the porch, squinting into the morning sun. "No, Mr. Daniel. Maybe she lost." As the girl drew closer, Daniel could see she was Hispanic, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, her clothes clean but clearly well worn. She walked with purpose, despite her obvious nervousness, clutching a manila folder against her chest. "Excuse me," she called when she spotted Daniel by the barn. "Are you Mr. Thompson?" "I am. You're a long way from the school bus, miss. You lost?" The girl shook her head firmly. "No, sir. I'm Emma Morales. I need to talk to you about your bull." Daniel raised an eyebrow. In 15 years of running cattle, he'd never had a child show up asking about livestock. Which bull would that be? The one with the broken leg. The one they were going to kill. Emma's voice carried a matter-of-fact quality that surprised him. "My uncle Roberto works at the slaughterhouse. He told me about the big black bull that got away from the truck." Daniel studied her face, noting the serious expression that seemed too old for her years. "Your Uncle Roberto, he work at Patterson Processing?" Yes, sir. He's the one who loads the trucks. He said the bull fought so hard to get out that they figured he deserved his chance. Emma shifted the folder to her other hand. Is it true you're trying to save him? Where exactly did you hear that? My mom works at Dr. Mitchell's clinic. She cleans the offices after hours. She heard Dr. Mitchell talking to another vet about the surgery you paid for. Emma's chin lifted slightly, as if preparing for rejection. I wanted to ask if I could help. Daniel glanced back toward the barn where Titan lay resting. The bull had been making steady progress, but recovery was a long process requiring constant monitoring, wound care, and physical therapy to prevent muscle atrophy. Help how exactly? Emma opened her folder, revealing several sheets of notebook paper covered in careful handwriting. I've been researching bovine rehabilitation. The library has veterinary journals, and Mrs. Patterson at the school helped me understand the big words. I know about passive range of motion exercises and hydrotherapy protocols. Daniel took the papers, genuinely surprised by the depth of research. The girl had compiled information on everything from nutrition during recovery to signs of infection to watch for. Her handwriting was neat, her notes organized with the thoroughness of someone taking the project seriously. This is impressive work, Emma, but why? You don't even know me, and you've never seen the bull. Emma's expression grew more serious. My family came here from Mexico when I was 7. My dad worked construction until he got hurt on a job site. No insurance, no workers' compensation. The foreman said he was just a liability after that. She paused, clearly choosing her words carefully. They threw him away like he wasn't worth fixing. Daniel felt something tighten in his chest. What happened to your father? He found other work, but it took time. People helped us, brought food, helped with medical bills. Mom says when someone shows you kindness when you're thrown away, you remember it forever. Emma looked toward the barn. Uncle Roberto said you could have just called animal control, let them put the bull down, but you didn't. Your parents know you're here? Mom's at work. She cleans houses in town before her shift at the clinic. I told her I had a school project. Emma's honesty was disarming. She'd worry if she knew I was bothering important people. You're not bothering anyone. But this isn't like a school project, Emma. This is a 2,000-pound animal that could kill you without meaning to. Even injured, bulls are dangerous. I know that. I read about safety protocols, too. Emma pulled another sheet from her folder. Approach from the side, never from behind. Watch the ears and tail for signs of agitation. Never turn your back. Wear steel-toed boots. She looked down at her worn sneakers. I don't have those yet, but I'm saving up. Despite himself, Daniel found himself impressed by her thoroughness. How would you even get here? That school bus doesn't run out here every day. I can ride my bike. It's only 8 miles from town. I've done longer rides. Emma's voice carried the matter-of-fact confidence of a kid who'd learned early that wanting something meant figuring out how to get it. I could come after school, weekends, help with the basic care so you can focus on your business. Daniel looked at the research papers again, then at Emma's earnest face. Every practical instinct told him this was a bad idea. A child working with livestock opened up liability issues, safety concerns, complications he didn't need. But something about her reminded him of himself at that age. Determined, resourceful, willing to work for what she believed in. Tell you what, Emma. Let me meet your mother first. If she's okay with it, and Dr. Mitchell agrees to supervise, we can start with basic observation. No direct contact with Titan until we're sure you understand the risks. Emma's face lit up with a smile that transformed her serious expression. Really? You mean it? I mean, we'll see. But first, let's go call your mom. She's probably wondering where you ended up when you didn't get off that school bus. As they walked toward the house, Daniel found himself thinking about the girl's words. When someone shows you kindness when you're thrown away, you remember it forever. Maybe Emma understood something about Titan that he was still learning himself. Behind them, from the barn, came the sound of movement, Titan shifting position, getting marginally stronger each day. Recovery, Daniel was learning, was rarely a solo journey. Thompson Ranch. 4 weeks after surgery, Maria Morales arrived at the ranch in a dust-covered Honda Civic that had seen better decades, her work uniform still bearing the faint smell of cleaning chemicals. She stepped out of the car with the careful posture of someone whose day began at 4 a.m. and wouldn't end until well past sunset. "Mr. Thompson," she said, extending a work-calloused hand. "I'm sorry my daughter bothered you. Emma, she gets ideas and doesn't think about consequences." Daniel shook her hand, noting the firm grip and the direct eye contact. "She wasn't any bother, Mrs. Morales. Matter of fact, she impressed me. That research she did, most college students don't put that kind of effort into their work." Behind her mother, Emma shifted nervously from foot to foot, clearly unsure whether she was in trouble or being praised. "Emma told me what you're doing for this bull," Maria continued. "My brother Roberto, he said at the plant they were surprised anyone would take an animal like that. Most ranchers, they would have called it a loss." "Most ranchers would be right," Daniel admitted. "Business-wise, it doesn't make sense. But sometimes business sense isn't the only thing that matters." Maria studied his face, then looked toward the barn where Emma had told her the bull was recovering. "My daughter, she wants to help you. But Mr. Thompson, we don't have money for insurance if something happens. If she gets hurt, that's exactly what we need to discuss." Daniel gestured toward the porch chairs. "Dr. Mitchell thinks it could be valuable, having someone consistent helping with basic care. But there are rules, safety protocols, and Emma would need to understand that this isn't a pet. This is a wild animal that could kill her without meaning to." Dr. Mitchell's truck pulled into the driveway before Maria could respond. The veterinarian stepped out carrying her medical bag and a manila folder thick with paperwork. "Perfect timing," Daniel said. "Sarah, this is Maria Morales, Emma's mother. We were just discussing Emma's proposal to help with Titan's care." Sarah shook Maria's hand, then addressed Emma directly. "Your mother told me you've been researching bovine rehabilitation. That's serious work, not something you can learn from a few internet articles." "I know," Emma said quietly. "I read the journal articles you have in your office, the ones about passive range of motion therapy and infection monitoring. I made notes." Sarah opened her folder, revealing Emma's research papers alongside professional veterinary guidelines. "I've compared her notes with standard protocols. She's identified the key indicators correctly: swelling patterns, mobility benchmarks, nutritional requirements during recovery." "But?" Maria asked, clearly sensing there was more. "But knowledge and application are different things. A 2,000-pound bull can kill someone just by moving wrong, even if he's trying to be gentle." Sarah looked at Emma seriously. "Are you prepared for the possibility that despite everything we do, Titan might not fully recover? That all this effort might not save him?" Emma considered the question with the gravity it deserved. "Uncle Roberto says at the plant they don't usually get second chances, but everybody deserves at least one, right? Even if it doesn't work out." "That's a mature answer," Sarah said. "Here's what I'm willing to do. 3 afternoons a week after school, Emma can assist with basic care under my direct supervision. We start with observation only, learning to read Titan's body language, understanding his routine. If she demonstrates she can follow safety protocols without exception, we gradually increase her responsibilities." Daniel watched Maria's face, recognizing the internal calculation every working parent knew, weighing opportunity against risk, hope against practicality. "The liability insurance," Maria began. "Covered under my ranch policy," Daniel said, "and Sarah's malpractice insurance covers any medical decisions. Emma would essentially be a supervised volunteer, like the kids who help at the county fair." "What about transportation? I work until 6 most days." "I can drive her home," Daniel offered. "It's not out of my way." Maria looked at her daughter, then at the barn where an injured bull was defying the odds simply by surviving. "Emma, you understand this is not like taking care of a dog? This animal could hurt you badly without meaning to?" "I understand, Mama. I promise I'll follow all the rules." "And your schoolwork comes first. Always." "Yes, Mama." Maria turned back to Daniel and Sarah. "Then we try, but first sign of problems, any problems, we stop." That afternoon, Emma's first official session began with 45 minutes of safety instruction before she was allowed within 20 feet of Titan. Sarah demonstrated proper approach techniques, how to read the bull's ear position and tail movement, where to position herself to avoid being trapped if he suddenly moved. Bulls communicate differently than horses or dogs, Sarah explained. They're prey animals, but they're also powerful enough to be predators when threatened. You have to think like both at once. Emma listened with the intense concentration of someone who understood that attention to detail could mean the difference between safety and disaster. When they finally approached Titan's stall, the bull lifted his massive head, eyes tracking the newcomer with cautious interest. He'd been bearing more weight on his injured leg each day, and the surgical site showed clean healing with no signs of infection. "He's bigger than I expected," Emma whispered. "Most people say that," Daniel replied. "You having second thoughts?" Emma studied Titan's face, noting the intelligence in his dark eyes, the way his ears stayed forward rather than pinning back in aggression. "No, he's just impressive." Under Sarah's watchful eye, Emma began the basic routine that would structure their afternoons together, checking water levels, monitoring food consumption, observing and recording Titan's movements and behavior. Each task was simple, but together they formed a comprehensive picture of the bull's recovery progress. "Recovery is about consistency," Sarah explained, as Emma carefully noted how much hay Titan had consumed. "Small improvements day by day. Some days will be setbacks. The key is not giving up when progress feels slow." As the session ended, Emma carefully filed her observation notes in a folder she decorated with hand-drawn pictures of bulls. "Dr. Mitchell, do you think he'll be able to run again? Like really run, not just walk?" Sarah considered the question seriously. "Ask me in another month." "But Emma, even if he never runs like he did before, that doesn't mean saving him was wrong. Sometimes surviving is enough of a victory." Driving Emma home that evening, Daniel found himself thinking about the girl's dedication, her family's willingness to trust him with their daughter's safety, Sarah's professional guidance. What had started as an impulsive decision to save one rejected bull was becoming something larger, a community of people invested in proving that being written off didn't mean being worthless. "Mr. Thompson," Emma said as they pulled into her neighborhood, "thank you for letting me help. I know you didn't have to." "Thank you for caring enough to ask," Daniel replied. "Titan's lucky to have someone who believes in second chances." As he drove back to the ranch, Daniel realized that somewhere in the process of saving Titan, he'd started building something he hadn't had in years. A sense of purpose that extended beyond profit margins and production numbers. Tomorrow would bring another day of careful progress, another step toward proving that sometimes the best business decisions were the ones that couldn't be measured in dollars. The March sun carried the first real warmth Montana had felt in months, melting the last patches of snow and revealing grass that was already showing hints of green. Daniel stood at the edge of the south pasture, watching Emma run through her final safety checklist with the thoroughness of someone who'd learned that preparation prevented problems. "Water bucket positioned outside kick range," Emma called, marking her clipboard. "Gate secured but not latched. Dr. Mitchell's emergency kit in place. Steel-toed boots." She looked down at her feet, grinning. "Finally purchased with my own money." 3 months of after-school jobs, helping neighbors with yard work, babysitting younger kids, even washing dishes at the local diner, had earned Emma the $60 boots she'd wanted. More than that, it had earned her the respect of adults who'd watched her work toward a goal with single-minded determination. "Titan's movement assessment shows 85% normal gait," Dr. Mitchell announced, reviewing the charts Emma had meticulously maintained. "Range of motion is within acceptable parameters. Surgical site shows complete healing with no complications." Daniel felt a tightness in his chest that had nothing to do with the cold air. After 93 days of careful monitoring, gradual exercise, and constant vigilance, they'd reached the moment he'd barely dared to hope for. "So what you're saying is," Daniel began, "what I'm saying is that Titan has recovered sufficiently to be cleared for supervised pasture time." Sarah's professional demeanor couldn't hide her satisfaction. "Not full release yet. We'll need to monitor his response to increased activity. But yes, Daniel, your bull is going to be fine." Emma let out a whoop that sent several nearby cattle lifting their heads in curiosity. "Did you hear that, Titan? You're going to run again!" From his stall, Titan raised his massive head, ears forward, as if he understood the excitement in her voice. Over the past months, he'd grown accustomed to Emma's presence, even seeming to anticipate her arrival each afternoon. Not the anthropomorphic bonding of fairy tales, but the practical recognition of routine and consistent care. "There's something else," Sarah said, pulling an official-looking document from her veterinary bag. "I've been contacted by Colorado State University's veterinary program. They want to document this case for their large animal rehabilitation curriculum. Recovery from this type of injury in bovines is rare enough that it could help future veterinarians understand what's possible." Daniel took the document, scanning the university letterhead and formal request for medical records and photographic documentation. "They want to study what we did here?" "They want to study what Emma did here," Sarah corrected. "Her observation logs, her research, her consistency of care. It's textbook example of how dedicated monitoring can impact recovery outcomes. They're offering her a scholarship consideration for their pre-veterinary program when she's ready for college." Emma's eyes widened. "A scholarship? For real?" "For real. Apparently 12-year-olds who can maintain detailed medical records and demonstrate this level of commitment aren't common." Sarah smiled. "They want to encourage that kind of dedication to animal welfare." Maria Morales, who'd been quietly watching from the fence line, walked over to her daughter. "Mija, you understand what this means? A university scholarship?" Emma nodded solemnly, then looked toward Titan. "It means I can learn to help more animals like him, animals that people think aren't worth saving." Daniel found himself remembering the morning he'd first seen Titan, injured, rejected, stumbling along his fence line. The practical decision would have been to put the bull out of his misery. Instead, that moment had become the beginning of something none of them had expected. "There's one more thing," Daniel said, reaching into his jacket pocket. "I've been thinking about what happens next. Titan's recovered, but he can't go back to breeding operations. His leg will always have some limitation, and I can't justify keeping a non-productive bull on a working ranch indefinitely." Emma's face fell. "You're not going to—" "I'm going to retire him," Daniel continued. "Permanent pasture, no work requirements, no expectations except to live out his days on good grass with proper care. But I'm also going to establish something called the Second Chance Fund. Money set aside specifically for cases like this, animals that the system writes off but might be worth saving." He pulled out a legal document he'd had drawn up the previous week. "I'm endowing it with $500,000 to start. Emma, if you're willing, I'd like you to help evaluate cases once you're old enough. Help decide which animals deserve a second chance." The silence that followed was filled with understanding rather than shock. Over 3 months, they'd all learned that some decisions couldn't be measured in profit and loss. "Mr. Thompson," Emma said quietly, "are you sure? That's a lot of money." "Emma, 3 months ago, I thought success meant having the most profitable ranch in 3 counties. Now I think maybe success means proving that value isn't always about productivity." Daniel looked toward Titan, who was standing calmly in his stall, weight evenly distributed on all 4 legs. "Besides, I can afford it, and something tells me it's going to be a good investment." That afternoon, they opened the gate to the south pasture for the first time since Titan's arrival. The bull stepped carefully onto the grass, testing his weight, his head raised to catch scents carried on the spring breeze. Emma watched from outside the fence, her clipboard forgotten, as Titan took one careful step, then another. His gait showed slight favoring of the repaired leg, but his movement was steady and controlled. "He's not running," Emma observed. "He's thinking," Daniel replied. "Figuring out what he can do, what feels right." As if responding to their conversation, Titan suddenly lifted his head and walked, not ran, but walked with purpose, across 30 yards of pasture. At the far fence, he turned and looked back toward them, and Daniel could swear there was satisfaction in that look. "He knows," Emma whispered. "He knows he made it." Dr. Mitchell packed her equipment, her job officially complete. "You know, Daniel, in 20 years of veterinary practice, this is the first time I've been part of something that felt more like healing than just treating." As the sun set over the Montana mountains, Emma completed her final observation log entry. Day 93. Patient demonstrates full mobility within physical limitations. Attitude alert and content. Prognosis, excellent for continued quality of life. Treatment successful. She closed the folder and handed it to Daniel. "Thank you for letting me help save him." Daniel accepted the folder, but his attention was on the girl who'd ridden her bicycle 8 miles 3 times a week for 3 months to care for a bull the world had given up on. Thank you for showing me that some things are worth saving even when they don't make sense on paper. Behind them, Titan grazed peacefully in his pasture, living proof that rejection didn't have to be permanent, that second chances sometimes led to outcomes no one could have predicted. The Montana wind carried the sound of contentment, not just from the bull who'd found sanctuary, but from the community that had formed around the simple act of refusing to give up on something the world had written off. Sometimes the most important victories were measured not in dollars earned, but in lives transformed by the radical act of caring.